The blood had dried to a dark crust under her fingernails again. Lyra scraped at it with a piece of broken slate, while the youngest boy, Tomek, traced the letter K into the dirt floor with a stick, his tongue poking out between the gap where his front teeth used to be. The chain around her left ankle clinked against the iron ring, bolted to the wall every time she leaned forward to correct his grip, and the sound had become so familiar that the children no longer flinched at it. They had learned, as children do, to normalize what should never be normal. She bit into the pad of her thumb. Not deep. Just enough for the red to well up like a slow spring. She squeezed 3 drops onto the flat stone she used as a pallet, mixed it with a little water from the cup Tomek had smuggled from the well, and dipped the frayed end of a reed into the pink wash. "This is how you make the letter M," she said, painting it onto a strip of birch bark, 2 mountains with a valley between them. Si Tomek nodded solemnly. He was 6. He had not spoken a full sentence since the siege of Ashenmoor, when his mother had been killed running between the south gate and the granary with a loaf of bread in each hand. Lyra knew this because Tomek had drawn the picture for her 3 weeks ago. 2 circles for bread, a stick figure lying down, a red smear he had pressed his whole palm into. She kept that drawing hidden under the straw pile where she slept. It was the most honest thing anyone in the Greymarch pack had ever produced, and none of them would ever see it. There were 9 children now. 9 war orphans who came to her corner of the supply cellar whenever the guards changed shifts, which happened twice a day, at dawn and at dusk. The gap between the old guard leaving and the new guard arriving lasted exactly as long as it took to smoke a hand-rolled cigarette, because that is what Corporal Hennis did every evening before descending the stairs to check on her chain. She had timed it. 11 minutes. Sometimes 12 if the tobacco was damp. 11 minutes to teach a child to read. It was not enough. It was everything. The cellar smelled of turnip skins and lamp oil, and the particular sweetness of grain that has started to rot at the bottom of the sack. Lyra had lived in this smell for 2 years since Elder Voss had decided that an Omega, with no wolf, no family and no pack markings, was useful only as inventory labor. She counted sacks. She sorted dried meat from dried fish. She stacked firewood into walls that reached the low ceiling, and when the wood was stacked, she unstacked it and stacked it again, because Elder Voss believed that idle hands invited rebellion, and rebellion invited the Alpha King's army back to their gates. The Alpha King. Even the name made the children sit straighter. Lyra had never seen him. No one in the Greymarch labor hold had. He existed the way weather exists, as a force that shaped everything without being visible. His war against the Northern Confederation had orphaned every child in this cellar. His treaties had redrawn borders that left Greymarch on the wrong side of a supply line. His name was spoken by Elder Voss the way a priest speaks of divine punishment, as something inevitable, as something deserved. She did not think about him. She thought about the letter M, 2 mountains with a valley. Tomek tugged her sleeve. He pointed at the bark strip, then at his own chest, then held up the stick like a question mark. "You want to write your name?" she asked. He nodded. She bit her thumb again. The old wound had barely scabbed. The pain was a quick, bright thing, like touching a hot pan, and then it faded into the steady warmth of blood moving to the surface. She painted Tomek onto a fresh piece of bark, slowly letting him watch each stroke. He took the reed from her hand and copied the letters into the dirt. His T leaned badly to the left. His O was more of a potato. But the letters were there, and he stared at them with an expression she had seen only once before on the face of a woman in her old pack who had just given birth and was looking at the baby as if confirming that it was real. "That is you," Lyra said quietly. "Those marks on the ground. That is your name. No one can take it. Tomek pressed his hand flat over the letters covering them, protecting them. Then he looked up at her and did something he had not done in the 5 months she had known him. He smiled. The cellar door banged open. Lyra swept her arm across the dirt, smearing the letters into nothing. The children scattered like startled birds, disappearing behind sacks and woodpiles, with a practiced silence that broke her heart every time she witnessed it. Tomek was the fastest. He was through the gap behind the grain stack before the first boot hit the top stair. Corporal Hennis descended slowly. He was a thin man with a neck like a turkey and a habit of cracking his knuckles one at a time, pinky to thumb left hand, then right. He did this now, standing over her, the lantern he carried, throwing his shadow across the wall so that it looked like something with wings. "Talking to yourself again?" he said. "Counting sacks," she replied. Her voice was flat and careful, the voice of someone who has learned exactly how much personality a captive is allowed to have. Hennis grunted. He walked the perimeter of the cellar, checking the stores, making marks in a small leather book he kept in his breast pocket. His pencil was dull, and he licked the tip before each notation, a habit that left a grey smudge on his lower lip. "Elder Voss wants the south inventory by morning," he said, without looking at her. "Every sack, every barrel, weight and condition." He tossed a stub of charcoal at her feet. "Write it on the wall if you have to." "I don't care how." He paused at the bottom of the stairs. Half turned. "I heard you," he said. "Before. Teaching them something." Lyra said nothing. Hennis cracked his right thumb. The sound was like a small branch snapping. "I had a daughter," he said. "Before the border shifted. She would have been about Tomek's age." He climbed the stairs without finishing the thought. The door closed. The bolt slid home. Lyra waited until his footsteps faded completely, then let out a breath she had been holding so long her ribs ached. She pressed her bleeding thumb against her trouser leg and stared at the charcoal he had given her. A stub of charcoal was worth more than food down here. With charcoal, the children could practice without her blood. She picked it up. It was still warm from his pocket. From behind the grain stack, Tomek's eyes caught the lantern light. She held up the charcoal so he could see it, and his gap-toothed smile returned. And for a moment, the cellar smelled like nothing at all, because she forgot to notice. That was the last quiet night. The Alpha King's convoy arrived at Greymarch before dawn, when the sky was the color of a bruise that hasn't decided whether to turn purple or green. Lyra heard it first, as vibration, a hum in the iron ring that held her chain, transmitted up through the stone floor from the wheels of heavy wagons and the hooves of war horses passing above. Then voices. Many voices. And beneath them, the low, resonant growl that wolves make when they are large enough to be felt rather than heard. She pressed her palm flat against the floor. The stone was trembling. Upstairs, something crashed. Doors opened and did not close. Boots everywhere, dozens of them, moving in patterns that suggested organization rather than chaos. This was not a raid. This was an occupation that had arrived by appointment. The cellar door opened for the second time that night, and this time it was not Hennis. 3 soldiers descended the stairs in formation. They wore black leather, marked with a crest she did not recognize. A wolf's head, bisected by a sword, stitched in silver thread that caught the light. They carried no lanterns. Their eyes, all 3 pairs, reflected gold in the darkness, which meant their wolves were close to the surface, which meant they were powerful enough to hold a partial shift without losing control. One of them, a woman with a shaved head, and a scar that began at her left ear and ended somewhere inside her collar, stopped 3 feet from Lyra and inhaled through her nose. "Omega," the soldier said. "Chained." She looked back at the others. "Mark it for the census." The second soldier began documenting. The third walked the perimeter, the way Hennis had, but faster, with the efficiency of someone who has inventoried 100 captured supply cellars. He opened sacks, tested grain between his fingers, sniffed the dried meat and discarded one bundle that Lyra could have told him was spoiled if anyone had asked. No one asked. She was inventory. She had been inventory for 2 years. The woman with the scar crouched in front of her, not close enough to touch, respectful of the feral distance that chained wolves sometimes developed. How long, she asked. 2 years, Lyra said. Who owns this chain, Elder Voss? Greymarch Pack. The woman's jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes. Not sympathy, exactly. Something more practiced than that. The expression of a soldier who has seen this specific thing enough times to have a protocol for it. The king will want to see this, she said to the second soldier. He's inspecting the north granary. Then we wait. They waited. Lyra sat very still the way a rabbit sits when the shadow of a hawk passes overhead. She could smell them now, all three. The woman smelled of steel polish and road dust and something herbal like thyme, but sharper. The men smelled of horse sweat and oiled leather, and the particular musk of wolves who have been running for days without shifting back fully. And then beneath all of it, something else. It came down the stairs before he did, a scent like wood smoke and frozen earth and the iron tang of old blood layered over something warmer that she could not name. Something that made the hair on her arms stand up and the back of her neck flush hot and her lungs fill without her telling them to, as if her body had decided independently that it needed more of this air. More of this specific air. Right now. Her wolf stirred. Lyra's breath caught. Her wolf had been silent for 6 years, since the night the Greymarch elders had tested every child for pack compatibility and declared her wolfless an omega, without a spirit animal, a body without a soul. She had accepted it the way one accepts gravity. You do not argue. You simply live on the ground. But something was moving in the space behind her ribs. Something that had been sleeping so deeply, she had mistaken it for absence. It pressed against the walls of her chest like a fist unclenching, and she felt heat spread through her blood, actual physical heat, as if someone had poured warm water into her veins. She looked at the stairs. He filled the doorway the way a storm fills a window. He had to angle his shoulders to descend, and even then his head nearly brushed the ceiling. His hair was black and cut close to his skull, and his jaw was the kind of jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to take a punch without moving. His eyes were amber, not gold like his soldiers', but darker. The color of pine resin when you hold it up to firelight. He wore no crown. He did not need one. The air around him had a weight to it, a density, as if the molecules themselves were standing at attention. Alpha King, Kyle Dranthis, warlord of the Six Peaks, conqueror of the Northern Confederation, the man who had redrawn the map of the continent with blood and treaty ink. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He inhaled, and something happened to his face. The cold authority that had been carved into his features cracked, not dramatically, not like a dam breaking, like a single fissure running through ice on a lake in early spring. Small, silent, irreversible. His wolf surged forward behind his eyes, and the amber darkened to something almost black before snapping back, and his hand shot out and gripped the wooden support beam beside the stairs so hard that it groaned, and then he was looking directly at her with an expression she had never seen on another living creature. It was recognition, but not the kind you have when you see someone you've met before, the kind you have when you see something you have been looking for so long that you had forgotten you were still searching. "Everyone out," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel being dragged across stone. The 3 soldiers moved immediately. No questions, no hesitation. The woman with the scar passed him on the stairs and did not look back. The cellar was empty, except for the two of them, and the smell of turnip skins and lamp oil, and the one smell that was drowning everything else: wood smoke and frozen earth and blood. Hers smelled different to him, she realized. She did not know what she smelled like to him. She only knew that he was standing very still and breathing very carefully, the way a man breathes when he is trying not to do something. "Who put this chain on you?" he said. It was not a question. It was a sentence that had a question mark at the end, only because the grammar required it. His eyes were on the iron cuff around her ankle, and his jaw was working, and his hands were fists at his sides. "Elder Voss," she said again. He crossed the cellar in 4 strides. He knelt in front of her, which put his face level with hers, and she could see now that there was a scar on his left temple, thin and white, and that his eyelashes were unexpectedly long, and that up close the amber of his eyes had flecks of green in them like moss on stone. He reached for the chain. Not for her. For the chain. His fingers wrapped around the iron links, and he pulled. Not hard. Effortlessly. The way you tear a piece of paper. The iron parted with a sound like a gasp, and the chain fell away from the wall ring, and the cuff was still on her ankle, but she was no longer connected to anything. She stared at the broken chain in his hand. The links were twisted, deformed by the force of a grip that could have crushed bone. He set the chain down carefully on the floor, as if it were something fragile he did not want to damage further. "What is your name?" he said. "Lyra." Lyra. He said it the way Tomek had looked at his name written in the dirt, as if confirming it was real. "Lyra, you are my mate." She should have felt something romantic. She should have felt the swelling music, the destiny clicking into place, the warmth of fate's design. What she actually felt was terror. Pure, clean, bladder-loosening terror, because she was an Omega, chained in a cellar who had just been claimed by the most powerful wolf on the continent, and powerful men who wanted things from powerless women had only ever meant one thing in her experience. She pressed her back against the wall. The stone was cold through her thin shirt. "I am no one's mate," she said. "My wolf is dead." Something flickered across his face. Not anger. Confusion. As if she had told him the sky was green. "I can feel her," he said. "Your wolf. She is not dead. She is awake. That is impossible." He held out his hand, palm up. The calluses were thick across his fingers, layered like geological strata, each one a different fight, a different year. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. Lyra did not take his hand. She looked at the broken chain on the floor. She looked at the cuff still locked around her ankle. She looked at his enormous hand, with its history written in hardened skin. "Everyone who has ever said that to me," she said, "has hurt me." He did not withdraw his hand. He did not argue. He simply held it there, open, patient, like a door that does not close, regardless of how long you stand in the hallway. "Then I will wait," he said, "until you have a reason to believe different." He stood. He was so tall that she had to tilt her head back to see his face, and the lantern behind him turned his silhouette into something that belonged in a cathedral. "I am taking Greymarch under direct authority," he said. "Elder Voss will answer for this cellar. You will be moved to quarters above ground. You will not be chained. If anyone touches you, you will tell Captain Wren." He paused. The woman with the scar. He turned to leave. His boot was on the first stair when she spoke. "The children," she said. He stopped. "There are 9 children. War orphans. They hide in here during the guard change. They have no one. If you move me, they will have nowhere to go." He was quiet for a long time. The wood of the stair creaked under his weight. She could see only his back, the massive width of his shoulders, the tension running through them like a wire. "They will be housed," he said. "Fed, protected, and educated." He turned his head, just enough to show one amber eye, one eyebrow slightly raised. "You have conditions," he said. His voice had something in it she had not expected, something that might have been the ghost of amusement. "I have students," she said. He climbed the stairs without another word, but she heard it, just before the door closed. A sound that was barely a sound, a breath pushed through the nose, the smallest possible exhale of something that in a different man, in a different cellar on a different night, might have been a laugh. The quarters they gave her were on the second floor of the main hall, a room with a window that faced east, and a bed with actual sheets, and a door that locked from the inside. She stood in the center of the room for 20 minutes without touching anything, because the last time she had been in a room this clean, she had been 7 years old, and her mother had still been alive, and the Greymarch border had still been whole. Captain Wren brought the cuff key herself. She knelt without ceremony, unlocked the iron, and set it on the bedside table. "Keep it," Wren said. "Some people find it helps to remember what is over." Lyra looked at the cuff. The skin beneath it was a ring of scar tissue, white and shiny, permanently altered. She did not need the cuff to remember. Her body was already the archive, the children, she said, being settled in the East Wing. Wren studied her with the appraising gaze of a career soldier, sizing up an unknown quantity. He barely said 3 words during the entire march from the northern front. Now he has reorganized the housing plan of an entire occupied territory because a chained Omega mentioned children. She paused at the door. "I have served Kael Dranthis for 11 years. I have never seen him break iron with his bare hands." Lyra said nothing. Wren closed the door quietly behind her. The room had a mirror. Lyra had not seen her own reflection in 2 years. She stood before it now and catalogued what she saw. Thin, the bones of her clavicle visible like scaffolding under skin. Hair that had been dark brown was dull and matted, hanging past her shoulders in ropes that would need to be cut before they could be combed. The scar on her right forearm where Elder Voss's beta had pressed a hot iron 2 winters ago when she miscounted the barley sacks. The scar on her left palm where she had cut herself on a broken crate in the dark. The dozens of small scars on her fingertips and thumbs where she had opened her own skin to make ink for children who had no other teacher and no other tools. Her eyes were grey. She had forgotten that. She slept for 14 hours. The classroom was her idea, and the Alpha King's problem. She proposed it on the 2nd day, during what Captain Wren called a civilian audience, which was the 10-minute window each morning when occupied citizens could bring grievances to the new authority. Lyra walked into the great hall with 9 children behind her, arranged by height, the tallest in back, and Tomek at the front with his gap-toothed gravity, and she said that she needed a room with a south-facing window, a supply of paper ink, charcoal and chalk, and 3 hours each morning free from labor assignments. Kael Dranthis sat in the carved wooden chair that served as Greymarch's seat of authority. He had not slept by the look of him. The shadows under his eyes were purple, and his jaw was dark with stubble, and his hands rested on the arms of the chair with the careful immobility of someone who was restraining himself from movement. He looked at the children. He looked at her. His nostrils flared once, catching her scent across the hall, and something in his eyes shifted. And then he said, "South-facing room. Paper and ink will come from the convoy supply. You will have your mornings." A councilwoman named Marta, one of Elder Voss's former administrators who had been retained for continuity, leaned toward his ear and whispered something. Lyra caught only the word resources, and the phrase labor priority. Kael turned his head toward Marta slowly. The movement had the deliberate quality of a predator, deciding whether something was prey. "Say that again," he said. Loudly. Marta did not say it again. The classroom was a storeroom on the south side of the main hall, emptied of its crates and swept clean. There was one long table made of planks, laid across sawhorses and benches that the soldiers had built from salvaged timber, and the window let in a stripe of gold that moved across the floor like a sundial. Lyra stood at the front, with real ink for the first time in 2 years, and felt the particular vertigo of having what you need after a long period of needing. She taught them letters first, then words, then sentences. She used a method she had developed in the cellar, born of limitation and adapted now to abundance. Each child had a name card, a strip of paper with their name written in clear black letters, and the first thing they learned to read was themselves. Their own names. The shapes of their own identities rendered visible and permanent. Tomek carried his name card everywhere. In his pocket during meals. Under his pillow at night. He still did not speak, but he traced the letters with his finger so often that the ink began to wear thin, and Lyra made him a second card and then a third. She did not see the Alpha King for 4 days after the audience. She heard him. His voice carried through stone walls a bass register that she could feel in her sternum when he was in the great hall directly below her classroom. She caught his scent in hallways after he had passed the wood smoke and frozen earth lingering in the air like a handprint on glass. And at night, lying in her clean bed, with her ankles bare and her door locked from the inside, she felt the thing behind her ribs moving again. The wolf that could not exist. Pressing outward, reaching toward something. She pressed her hand against her chest and told it to be still. It was not still. On the 5th day, he came to the classroom. Not announced, not ceremonial. He simply appeared in the doorway during the morning lesson, filling it completely, and the children went silent in the way that small creatures go silent when a very large shadow falls over them. Lyra was mid-sentence, explaining how the letter S works, how it changes a word from one thing to many things. She stopped. The chalk in her hand suddenly felt ridiculous, a white stick against the vast, dark fact of him. "Continue," he said. He leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms and watched. She continued. Her voice was not steady at first, and then it was because the children were looking at her and not at him. And children who are frightened need their teacher to not be frightened, so she was not frightened. She was professional. She was a woman with chalk and students, and a south-facing window, and the most dangerous man alive was watching her explain plurals. He came back the next day, and the next, always the same position, leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, watching with those amber and green-flecked eyes that tracked her movements the way a wolf tracks something it cannot look away from. On the 3rd visit, Tomek walked up to him. The room held its breath. Lyra's hand tightened on the chalk. Cale Dranthis looked down at the 6-year-old boy, who barely reached his thigh, and Tomek held up his name card. Cale took it. He read it. He handed it back. "Tomek," he said. Tomek nodded. Then he tugged on the Alpha King's hand and pulled him toward the table where the other children sat, and Cale Dranthis, conqueror of the Northern Confederation, allowed himself to be led by a small, silent boy to a bench that was too small for him, and sat on it anyway, his knees rising almost to his chest. Lyra's throat closed. She turned to the board and wrote the next word, and blinked until the burning stopped. That afternoon, after the children had gone, Kyle remained. He sat on the too small bench and looked at the name cards spread across the table. He picked them up, one by one. Tomek, Anya, Gregor, Mela, Soren, Petra, Dima, Yuli, Reka. "You teach them their names first?" he said. "Yes." "Why?" Because a person who can read their own name knows they exist in a form that can survive them. It is the difference between being a sound that fades and a mark that remains. He set the cards down. He was quiet for a long time. The stripe of gold from the window had moved past the table and was climbing the far wall. "I cannot read," he said. Lyra looked at him. She had been standing near the board, cleaning chalk dust from the ledge, and she stopped. She did not believe she had heard him correctly, and then she saw his face and knew that she had. Kael Dranthis Alpha King, warlord, conqueror, the man who had reorganized an entire territory's housing plan overnight. The man who broke iron with his fingers. He sat on a child's bench with his shoulders slightly hunched and his hands flat on the table, and said the sentence the way a person confesses to a wound they have been hiding. "My father believed kings were made in battle, not in books," he said. "He trained my body, my wolf, my instinct for territory and threat. I lead through speech and memory. My generals read for me. My treaties are read aloud by scribes who swear oaths of silence." He looked at her. "No one knows." She set the chalk down. She walked to the table and sat across from him on a bench, equally too small so that they were facing each other like two adults in a room built for children. "Do you want to learn?" she asked. The question sat between them. She could see him processing it. Not the question itself, which was simple, but what it meant to answer it. What it cost a man who had built an empire on the illusion of omniscience to admit in a room that smelled of chalk dust and children's sweat that there were letters he could not read. "Yes," he said. She took a fresh strip of paper. She dipped her pen in the ink. She wrote 5 letters slowly and clearly, the way she wrote for Tomek, the way she wrote for every child who was seeing their own name for the first time. "C-A, A-Laha-Wahuta-Durosto, Watu-Duel." She turned the paper to face him. "This is you," she said. He stared at the letters. His face did something complicated, something that moved through several expressions without settling on any of them, and his hand came up and his finger, the same finger that had broken iron chain links, touched the paper so gently that it did not crease. "Again," he said. "Show me again." She showed him again. They worked for an hour. Just the letters of his name. She showed him how C curves like a hand cupping water, how A rises to a peak like a mountain with a bridge across its middle, how E has 3 shelves, how L stands upright and reaches out like a person extending a hand. He practiced on a separate sheet, his grip on the pen. Terrible, his letters enormous, taking up the entire width of the paper. His hand was too large for the pen, and the calluses made his grip uneven, and the letters looked like they had been written during an earthquake. He held up the paper. 4 letters. Barely legible. His name. Something in his eyes was very bright and very carefully controlled. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. He stood. He folded the paper twice, precisely, and put it in the breast pocket of his coat. Over his heart. He did not acknowledge this gesture, and neither did she, but they both knew where the paper was, and they both knew what it meant to carry your own name against your chest when you have never seen it written before. He went to the door. He paused. "Lyra." "Yes, thank you." It was the first time he had said her name since the cellar. It sounded different now. Less like a discovery, and more like a familiar thing, like a word he had been practicing in private. He left. She sat in the empty classroom and listened to his footsteps recede and pressed her hand against her chest, where her wolf was turning in circles, restless and warm like a dog settling before a fire. The lessons continued. Every afternoon after the children left, Kyle sat at the too small bench and learned to read. Lyra taught him the way she taught the children, with patience and specificity, and the understanding that literacy is not knowledge, but power. The power to exist independently of anyone who might choose to lie to you. He was not a quick learner. His mind worked in spatial patterns, in tactical dimensions, in the geometry of territory and threat. Letters were flat. They did not move. They required a kind of stillness that was foreign to a body built for action. He held the pen like a weapon and pressed so hard that he tore through the paper twice in the first week. But he was relentless. He practiced at night, she learned later in his quarters, filling sheets of paper with rows of letters that grew smaller and more controlled as the weeks passed. Captain Wren told her this in the careful, neutral tone of a woman who was watching her commander change shape and did not yet know whether to be alarmed or impressed. "He's using treaty paper," Wren said one morning, delivering a fresh supply of ink to the classroom. "The good parchment, the kind we use for border agreements. He's filled 30 sheets with the alphabet." Lyra thought about that. 30 sheets of treaty parchment, covered in letters written by hands that had conquered nations. She thought about the scribes who had been reading his documents for years, each one sworn to silence, each one holding the secret that the most powerful wolf alive could not read his own decrees. She wondered what it had cost him. Not the illiteracy, the hiding. She knew what hiding cost. She had been hiding her entire life. On the 3rd week, something happened that she could not explain. Cale was practicing letter combinations, building simple words, sounding them out with the intense concentration of a man defusing a bomb. The afternoon light was warm, and the room smelled of chalk and paper, and Lyra was sitting across from him, correcting his spelling of the word fire, when his hand touched hers. Not on purpose. He reached for the pen at the same time she reached to adjust his grip, and their fingers collided, and the contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds. The wolf behind her ribs detonated. Not stirred, not shifted. Detonated. A pulse of heat so violent that she gasped, and the room tilted, and she felt her eyes change. She felt the iris contract, and something else expand behind it, and Cale's head snapped up, and his own eyes went fully dark, the amber swallowed by black, and the pen fell from his hand, and for 3 seconds neither of them breathed. Then it passed. The heat receded. The room leveled. Her eyes returned to grey. His returned to amber. They stared at each other across the children's table, both of them breathing hard, both of them gripping the edge of the bench. "Your wolf," he said. "I told you," she whispered. "She is dead." "Lyra." His voice was very controlled, very measured, the voice of a man holding a door shut against a hurricane. That was not death. That was the opposite of death. She stood. She stepped back. The distance between them was only the width of the table, but she needed it the way a drowning person needs a breath. "I have to go," she said. She left her own classroom. She walked through the hall and up the stairs and into her room and locked the door and sat on the bed and pressed both hands against her ribs, where the wolf was pacing alive and furious and undeniable, and she thought about what Elder Voss had told her when she was 12. "You have no wolf. You are nothing. An omega without a spirit is a body without purpose." She had believed it. For 14 years she had believed it. Her hands were shaking. She looked down and saw that the scar on her right forearm, the burn from Elder Voss's beta, was glowing. A faint silver light barely visible, tracing the line of the scar tissue, like a vein of ore in rock. She pressed her other hand over it, and held it until the light faded. No one could see this. No one could know, because Lyra knew what silver light in the veins meant. Every wolf child was told the stories. Silver blood was the mark of the moon. Touched the ancient bloodline that the packs had hunted to extinction 3 centuries ago because their power was too great and their wolves too old, and the alphas of the age had decided that anything they could not control must be destroyed. She was not nothing. She was worse than nothing. She was something that should not exist. Elder Voss had known. She understood it now, sitting on her clean bed in the room with the lock on the inside. Voss had not chained her because she was useless. He had chained her because she was dangerous. He had not tested her wolf and found it missing. He had tested her wolf and found it terrifying, and he had done what frightened men do. He had buried it, suppressed it, built a cellar around it, and called it inventory. The realization was a cold thing, not a hot revelation. A slow ice spreading through her gut, freezing the architecture of her understanding and replacing it with something clearer and much worse. She did not go to the classroom the next morning. She did not go the morning after that. She told Captain Wren she was ill, and Wren looked at her with eyes that said she didn't believe it, leave it, but would not press, and the children were supervised by a junior soldier who let them draw on the walls, because he did not know what else to do with 9 small humans who missed their teacher. On the 3rd morning, Tomek appeared at her door. She did not know how he had found her room. She did not know how he had gotten past the guards who were supposed to keep the civilian quarters secure. She opened the door, and he was standing there, 6 years old, gap-toothed, holding a piece of paper in both hands. It was one of the name cards from the table, not his own. Cale's, the one she had written on the first day she taught the Alpha King to read. 4 letters in black ink, C-N-E-A-E-L. It must have been left on the table when she fled. Tomek must have found it. He held it out to her. His eyes were very serious. He pointed at the paper, then pointed down the hall in the direction of the classroom, and his meaning was perfectly clear even without speech. "He is looking for his name," Tomek was saying. "Come back." Lyra knelt. She was eye level with the boy now, and his face was very close, and she could see the freckles across his nose and the scab on his chin, where he had fallen the day before, and the absolute determination in his expression. The determination of a child who has learned that names matter because his teacher taught him that, and who will not allow his teacher to forget it. She took the paper. She went back. The classroom was empty when she arrived. The name cards were still on the table, but Cale's bench was pushed out at an angle, as if someone large had stood abruptly. She set his name card in the center of the table and began preparing the day's lesson, and when the children arrived, they rushed at her in a wave of small arms and unwashed hair, and one of them, Anya, who was 8 and bossy, and reminded Lyra of a terrier, said firmly, "We drew on the walls because Soldier Pavel said we could, but we know we are not supposed to." "You can draw on the walls," Lyra said, "as long as you label your drawings." The children cheered. Anya immediately began writing labels with the authority of a museum curator. Cale did not come that afternoon. He did not come the next day. On the 4th day, Captain Wren entered the classroom after the children left, stood at attention, for precisely 2 seconds, and then abandoned protocol entirely and sat down on the adult-sized chair that someone had brought for Lyra. "He has not slept," Wren said. "He has not eaten a full meal. He is running the occupation from a state of controlled collapse, and his wolf is so close to the surface that I can see it in his shadow." She looked at Lyra directly. "What happened between you two?" "Nothing." Wren's scar moved when she raised her eyebrow. It gave the expression a quality of skepticism that was almost architectural. "His wolf is destroying him from the inside. Your wolf, whatever you think about it, is apparently responding. I can smell the silver on you from 10 feet away, and if I can smell it, so can others." She leaned forward. "Whatever you are hiding, he is not your enemy." Lyra stacked the name cards. She straightened the chalk. She performed the small rituals of a teacher closing a classroom and said nothing because there was nothing to say that was not a confession. That night she went to the roof. The main hall of Greymarch had a flat roof that was used for grain drying in summer and nothing in winter. It was cold up there, the wind cutting through her clothes with the precision of a blade, and the sky was clear in the way that only mountain skies are clear. Every star a point of white fire in black glass. Cale was already there. He stood at the edge, facing the northern mountains, and the wind was pressing his shirt against the muscles of his back, and the moonlight was turning his skin the color of old silver. He did not turn when she approached. But his shoulders changed. Some tension left them, and some tension arrived, and the combination was a kind of a tension that she could feel like heat from a furnace. She stood beside him. Not close. 3 feet of cold air between them. She looked at the mountains. "I am moon-touched," she said. The words left her mouth and the wind took them, and for a moment she thought perhaps he had not heard, and then he turned his head and looked at her, and his face was the face of a man who has just been told something he already knew. "I know," he said. "How long?" "Since the cellar. Your scent has silver in it, like cold water over quartz." He paused. "My grandmother was moon-touched. She was killed before I was born. My father burned every record of her existence because he believed the bloodline was a weakness." He looked back at the mountains. Lyra watched his profile against the star field and tried to reconcile the man who could not read with the man who had known her secret before she had known it herself. "You are not going to tell me," she said. "It is not my secret to tell. But you knew. And you still claimed you as mate." His voice was quiet, but not uncertain. Lyra the Moon-Touched were hunted because they couldn't be controlled, not because they were weak, because they were the only wolves whose power answered to no alpha. He turned to face her fully, and his eyes in the moonlight were not amber, but silver, reflecting the moon, reflecting her. "You are the most dangerous thing in this territory, including me." She stared at him. The wind pushed her hair across her face, and she did not move it because her hands were shaking again, and she did not want him to see. "And that does not frighten you," she said. Something crossed his face. Something vulnerable and private. Something she suspected very few people had ever witnessed. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The same paper. The one she had written on the first day. Cael. He had been carrying it this whole time. "You gave me my name," he said. "Why would I fear the person who taught me I had one?" The wolf behind her ribs stopped pacing. It settled. It lay down. Not in submission. In rest. In the particular peace of an animal that has finally found the place where it belongs. Lyra closed the 3 feet of cold air. She took the paper from his hand. She turned it over, and in the moonlight, using the pen she always carried now in her pocket, she wrote a second name below his. A. Both of them, she said. Both names. He looked at the paper. Both names together. And his hand, the hand that broke iron, came up and touched her face with a gentleness so precise it felt like mathematics. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone as if he were learning the shape of a letter. She let him. The world did not end. The mountains did not move. The stars continued their indifferent burning, but the wind shifted direction, and for a moment the roof of Greymarch smelled of wood smoke, and chalk, and silver, and cold earth, and 2 wolves who had been alone for the entire duration of their separate lives stood together in that particular cold and that particular dark, and were for the first time not alone. They did not kiss. It was not time. But they stood on that roof until the moon set, and the stars dimmed, and the sky began its slow turn toward grey, and when they went inside, they went to separate rooms, and the paper with both names stayed in his pocket, and the wolf behind her ribs slept soundly for the first time in 14 years. Elder Voss arrived under guard on the 7th week. Cale had summoned him. Not from prison. Voss had not been imprisoned. He had been relocated to a border post after the occupation demoted to supply overseer of a grain depot 30 miles east, which Lyra understood to be a deliberate humiliation designed by someone who understood that for a man like Voss, irrelevance was worse than punishment. But the supply seller demanded a reckoning, and the chain demanded a reckoning. And Kyle Dranthis, whatever his patience with literacy and children and mates who needed time, was not a patient man when it came to justice. Voss walked into the great hall between two soldiers. He was smaller than Lyra remembered, thinner. The hair that had been iron grey was now white at the temples, and his hands, which had signed the order to chain her, trembled slightly at his sides. He wore the plain wool coat of a depot overseer, and he smelled of grain dust and the particular sour exhaustion of a man whose authority has been amputated. He saw Lyra, standing to the left of the Alpha King's chair, not behind it, not kneeling, standing. His eyes tracked from her face to the empty space where the chain had been, and back up, and something passed through his expression that was not fear exactly, but the recognition of an equation that had been solved incorrectly. He looked at Cale, then back at her. It woke up, he said. Not a question, a statement. Flat. Resigned. Almost conversational. The way a man who has been running from an avalanche stops running and turns to face it. It, Kyle said. The word was cold enough to lower the temperature of the room. Her wolf. Voss did not look away from Lyra. I tested her when she was 12. The standard pack compatibility assessment. When I touched her wrist to read her blood, the testing stone cracked. Not chipped. Split clean through. The last time that happened was 300 years ago. He paused. The elders burned that record. He straightened. His trembling hand steadied, and for a moment he was the man he had been before the occupation, the man who made decisions that ruined lives with the calm efficiency of a bookkeeper. I chained her because I was afraid, he said. His voice was clear. Not defiant. Not apologetic. Factual. I was afraid of what she was, and I was afraid of what would come for her if anyone found out. And I decided that a living Omega in a cellar was better than a dead moon touched on a pyre. He looked at Cale. You may disagree with my method, but she is alive. 300 years of her bloodline are not. And I had something to do with why she is the exception. The hall was silent. The soldiers on either side of Voss didn't move. Cale's hands rested on the chair arms. Lyra felt the blood rushing in her ears. She had expected a monster. She had wanted a monster. Monsters are simple. Monsters you can hate without complexity, and hatred without complexity is a clean and comforting thing. Voss was not a monster. He was a frightened man who had made a terrible choice for a reason that was not entirely wrong, and the truth of that was more uncomfortable than any cruelty. Cale stood. The chair creaked with the release of his weight. He descended the 2 steps from the platform and walked to Voss and stood before him, and the difference in their size was the difference between a wall and the door in it. You kept her alive, Cale said. I acknowledge that. Voss exhaled. You chained her to a wall for 2 years, Cale continued. She slept on straw. She fed herself with table scraps. She taught children to read using her own blood because you would not give her ink. He paused. I do not acknowledge that. The sentence hung in the air. Voss's jaw tightened. He did not beg. He did not argue. Whatever else he was a man who understood the calculus of consequences. Cale did not kill him. Lyra had expected that, too. The violent catharsis. The king destroying the villain before the cheering crowd. But Chael Dranthis she was learning a man who defied the shape of the stories people told about him. You will serve in the schoolroom, Chael said, under Lyra's direction. You will carry supplies, you will sharpen chalk, you will clean the boards. You will do this until she decides you have done it long enough. Voss stared. You chained her, Chael said. Now she holds your chain. The length of your sentence is hers to determine. He turned to Lyra. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were asking. She looked at Voss. The man who had tested her blood and found it terrifying and locked it in a cellar and called it mercy. The man who was not wrong about the danger and not right about the solution and not simple enough to be forgiven or condemned in a single moment. Start with sharpening the chalk, she said. The children go through it faster than you would believe. Something happened to Voss's face. Not relief, not gratitude. Something older and stranger, the expression of a man who has been expecting execution and received instead a task so mundane that it recalibrates his understanding of what justice looks like. He nodded. He started the next morning. He was terrible at sharpening chalk. His hands shook and the sticks crumbled, and Anya told him firmly that he was doing it wrong and showed him the correct angle, demonstrating with the confidence of an 8-year-old who has opinions about everything. Voss watched the child's hands and adjusted his grip and said nothing, and Lyra watched from across the room and felt something she could not name, something that lived in the space between anger and its absence. The weeks passed. Chael's reading improved. He moved from letters to words to simple sentences, and the first complete sentence he read without help was one Lyra had written for Tomek's lesson, a sentence that said, "The sun comes back every morning." He read it aloud in the empty classroom, his voice rough with concentration, and when he finished he sat very still for a long time and then said, "Write another one." She wrote another one, and another, and another. She filled sheets with sentences for him to practice, and he filled sheets with his own attempts, and the treaty parchment became a landscape of shared language, his enormous handwriting crowding against her neat script, 2 voices on the same page. It was during one of these sessions that he found it. The children had been writing letters, not alphabet letters, actual letters. To people. To parents they remembered, to siblings they had lost, to the idea of a future they were slowly beginning to believe in. Lyra had started the exercise as a way to practice sentence construction, but it had become something else, something that made the classroom very quiet and very sacred in the late afternoon light. Tomek's letter was on the table. He had left it face down, which was unlike him. He usually carried his writing with him, but today he had placed it carefully on the table and walked out without looking back. And Lyra had not read it, because she did not read the children's letters unless they asked her to. Chael picked it up. He was practicing his reading, working through the stack of papers on the table, and Tomek's letter was in the stack, and he picked it up and began to sound out the words the way she had taught him, moving his lips slightly, his finger tracking beneath each line. She watched his face change. The color left it first. Then the stillness came. Not his usual stillness, which was the stillness of control. This was the stillness of a man who has been struck and has not yet felt the pain. "Lyra," he said. His voice was strange, thin. She crossed the room and looked over his shoulder at Tomek's letter. It was addressed to no one. There was no "dear" at the top, just words written in the careful hand of a child who had learned to write only weeks ago. "My name is Tomek. The teacher gave it to me on bark with blood. Before that I was boy, or nothing. The soldiers burned my house and my mother fell down and did not get up. I did not talk after. The teacher says words are for when you are ready, and being quiet is also talking. The Alpha King sat at my table. He is big. He does not know his letters yet, but he is trying. I want to tell him something. There was a king in the old pack who burned things. He burned my mother's house. His name was on the orders. The teacher showed me how names work. The name on the orders was Cale. Lyra read it twice. She read it a third time, because her eyes were blurring and she needed to be certain. She looked at Cale. He was holding the paper with both hands, and his knuckles were white, and his wolf was so close to the surface that his eyes had gone fully dark, and the shadow behind him on the wall was not the shape of a man. It was the shape of something with a muzzle and raised hackles, and his mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. "Cale," she said. He set the paper down. His hands were shaking. The Alpha King of the Six Peaks. The man who had torn iron chain links apart with his bare fingers was trembling. "The Northern Campaign," he said. His voice was barely audible. Ashenmoor was on the border. We pushed through in winter. I gave the order to clear the civilian quarter, because intelligence said the militia was using houses as weapons caches. He stopped. He pressed his fists against his eyes. The order was mine. The name on it was mine. Lyra stood very still. The classroom was very quiet. The stripe of gold from the window was touching the edge of Tomek's letter, illuminating the child's careful handwriting. "The boy who cannot speak," Cale said. "The boy who carried my name card across the hall and gave it to you. The boy who pulled me to his table and showed me my own name. His mother is dead because I signed an order." "Yes," Lyra said. There was nothing else to say. She did not offer comfort, because comfort would have been an insult to the weight of the thing. She did not offer absolution, because absolution was not hers to give. She stood beside him in the quiet of the classroom, while the gold stripe moved across Tomek's letter, and the Alpha King of the Six Peaks learned that a 6-year-old boy who could not speak had found his name on the document that killed his mother. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Cale stood. He picked up the letter. He folded it carefully with the same precision he had used to fold the paper with his own name written on it, and he placed it in his breast pocket, next to the other paper, next to his name. He walked to the door. He stopped. "Does he know," he said, "that it was me?" "He learned to read," Lyra said quietly. "He found the records in the archive. Wren told me he was in there 3 days ago, looking at the military orders from the Northern Campaign." She paused. "He can't speak Cale, but he can read. And he chose to write you a letter instead of anything else." Cale put his hand on the doorframe. The wood creaked. "What do I do?" he said. It was the voice of a man who had conquered 6 territories and could not solve this. "You come to class tomorrow," Lyra said. "You sit at his table. You let him see you trying." He left. She listened to his footsteps, heavier than usual, slower the stride of a man carrying something that armor could not distribute. She picked up the chalk. She cleaned the board. She prepared tomorrow's lesson. These were the tasks that could be done, so she did them, and the ones that could not be done she left in the silence of the empty room, where they would keep until morning. Cale came to class the next day. He sat at Tomek's table. Not the adult bench, the child's bench, his knees against his chest again, his enormous frame folded into a space designed for someone a third his size. Tomek was already seated. He had his name card in front of him, and his chalk ready, and his face was turned toward the board with the expression of a child who is waiting for class to begin. Cale placed a sheet of paper on the table between them. Fresh paper. Good parchment. He picked up a piece of chalk, and in the slow, careful hand of a man who had only recently learned to write, he wrote 4 words. "I am sorry, Tomek." The classroom was so quiet that Lyra could hear the chalk dust settling. Tomek looked at the paper. He read the words. His lips moved silently, the way Cale's did when he was sounding out a sentence. He read them again. Then he picked up his own chalk, and beneath Kyle's words wrote 3 of his own. I know. Sit down. Cale was already sitting, but Tomek meant something larger than the physical act, and everyone in the room understood it. And the other children went back to their work with the particular discretion of young humans, who recognize that something important is happening at the next table, and that the polite thing to do is pretend it is not. Lyra taught the lesson. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Behind her ribs the wolf was wide awake and warm and still, and the silver in her blood was humming at a frequency that she could feel in her teeth, and she thought this is what power is supposed to be. Not the breaking of chains, not the conquering of territories. This. A child who lost his mother writing 3 words to the man who signed the order. A king who cannot read reading them. After class, she went to the roof. Cale was there. Of course he was. He was sitting this time, his back against the low parapet, his legs extended across the stone. He looked smaller against the sky. Not physically. Smaller the way people look smaller when they have stopped performing their size. She sat beside him. Close this time. No 3 feet of cold air. She sat near enough that her shoulder almost touched his arm, and the almost was its own kind of language. Tomek's letter is the bravest thing I have ever read, Kyle said, and I have read battle reports and surrender terms and the last words of dying generals. It is the first letter he has ever written, Lyra said. Kyle looked at the sky. His profile against the stars was the same as it had been on that first night, but different. Weathered by something that was not wind. The moon touched, he said. My grandmother. My father hunted her people, and then married one of them. He kept a wolf suppressed with iron root. Do you know what that is? Yes, Lyra said. She knew. Iron root grew in the northern mountains. When ingested, it dampened the wolf spirit. Made it sleep. Made it seem dead. She felt cold. She looked at him. Elder Voss, she said. He was growing it in the cellar, Kyle said. Wren found the plants, hidden behind the woodpile, mixed into the grain. You were eating it for 2 years. The cold spread, down her arms, into her fingers, the tips of her fingers where the scars were, where she had opened her own skin to make ink for children, where the blood had run thin and pink, because she had been malnourished and suppressed, and the wolf inside her had been drugged into silence so thoroughly that she had accepted its absence as fact. Everything she had believed about herself. Every year of thinking she was wolfless, purposeless, an omega without a soul. It had been manufactured, cultivated, a garden of absence carefully tended. She stood up. The silver was rising. She could feel it in her blood, a tide that had been held back by a dam that no longer existed, and the glow was visible now, running along the veins of her forearms in lines of cold white light, and the scar from the branding iron was incandescent, a brand of silver where there had been a brand of pain. Cale stood with her. He did not step back. He did not shield his eyes. He watched the light move through her body, with an expression that was not awe or fear, but recognition. The same expression he had worn in the cellar when he first smelled her scent. There she is, he said softly. The wolf came, not gradually, not gently. She arrived the way dawn arrives at the end of a very long night all at once, and everywhere filling every cell and fibre and vein with a presence so vast that Lyra's knees buckled, and Cale caught his arms around her, and she could feel his heartbeat against her back, and hear his wolf responding a low rumble in his chest that was not a growl, but a greeting. The silver light pulsed once, then again. then settled to a steady glow like moonlight held in skin, and Lyra looked at her hands and saw them clearly for the first time, illuminated from within, mapped in silver light, and each small scar on her fingertips was a point of brightness, a constellation of every drop of blood she had given to teach children their own names. She laughed. The sound surprised her so thoroughly that she clapped her hand over her mouth, and then she laughed again, because the wolf inside her was laughing too, or doing whatever the wolf equivalent was. A running in circles, a rolling in snow. The delirious, full-bodied joy of something that has been sleeping in a dark room for 14 years and has finally been let outside. Kyle held her. His arms were very steady. His chest was very warm. She could feel his wolf pressed against the boundary of his skin, responding to hers, and the two animals were doing something that felt like circling each other, not in threat, but in the ancient canine ritual of meeting, of becoming known. The light faded slowly. The silver dimmed. The stars above Grey March reasserted themselves. Lyra stood in the circle of the Alpha King's arms and breathed and felt for the first time in her adult life the full weight and breadth and depth of what she was. Not an omega, not a wolfless nothing, not inventory. A moon-touched wolf of the old blood, carrying a light that had survived 3 centuries of persecution because one frightened elder had locked it in a cellar instead of putting it on a pyre. She thought of Voss, sharpening chalk in her classroom with shaking hands, the complicated math of his cruelty, the equation that did not resolve. "I need to go downstairs," she said. He released her. His arms opened, and the cold air rushed in, and she felt the absence of his warmth, like a word removed from a sentence. She went to the schoolroom. She lit the lamp. She sat at her desk, and she wrote in the careful, clear hand she used for teaching a single page. It was not a lesson plan. It was not a letter. It was a list. The names of every moon-touched wolf who had been killed during the purge, as far as she could remember, from the stories her mother had told her before her mother died. The names were incomplete. Many were missing. But she wrote what she knew, and when she was done, she folded the page and placed it in the stack of tomorrow's teaching materials. The children would learn these names, not as history, as reading practice. Because a name is a name is a name, and every one of them deserves to be read aloud by a voice that is learning what words can do. The crisis came in week 11. A delegation from the Western Pax arrived unannounced. 4 alphas, their retinues, and a woman named Celine, who wore white silk in the middle of a supply territory and smelled of jasmine oil and political ambition. She was Captain Wren, explained the daughter of the Western High Alpha, and she had been promised to Cale Dranthis as part of a treaty negotiation that had begun before the occupation of Grey March, before Lyra. Selene was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful. Precise. Functional. Designed for a specific impact. She walked into the great hall with her retinue arrayed behind her like a hand of playing cards, and looked at Kyle the way a person looks at property they intend to improve. "Alpha Dranthis," she said. Her voice was pleasant and modulated, and carried the particular confidence of a woman who has never been chained to a cellar wall. "I believe we have a contract to discuss." Cale was standing at the window. He had been reading an actual book, a slim volume of territorial law that Lyra had been using as advanced practice material. He closed it when Selene entered, and the motion was calm, and his face was calm. And only Lyra, standing in the corner near the schoolroom door, where she had been gathering supplies, could see that his hand was not calm. His fingers were white around the book's spine. "Selene," he said, "your father's proposal was preliminary. No contract was signed. Preliminary agreements become contracts when both parties benefit, and both parties benefit considerably." She smiled. It was a smile with architecture behind it, load-bearing walls and strategic foundations. The Western Pax offer trade routes military alliance, and she paused delicately, an appropriate Luna for the Six Peaks throne. Her eyes found Lyra. They travelled from Lyra's face to her scarred hands, to her plain wool dress, to the chalk dust on her shoulder, and the assessment was so fast and so thorough that it had the quality of a medical scan. Selena's smile didn't change. That was the most chilling part. The smile simply absorbed the new information and continued smiling. "I see," she said. She did not specify what she saw. Later, that night, Lyra in her room. A knock at the door. Not Cale's knock, which was 2 heavy strikes that she felt in her sternum. This knock was light and precise, 3 taps evenly spaced. She opened the door. Selene, the Western Alpha's daughter, stood in the hallway in a nightgown of white linen that probably cost more than every piece of clothing Lyra had worn in her cumulative lifetime. Her dark hair was loose, and her face was free of the political smile, and what remained was something younger and more tired. "May I come in?" she said. Lyra let her in because she was curious, and because curiosity had always been stronger than caution in her, which was probably why she had started teaching children in a cellar using her own blood. Selene sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the room, the sparse furnishings, the name cards on the desk, the iron cuff on the bedside table. She picked up the cuff, turned it over, set it down. "I am not going to threaten you," she said. "I know that is what you expect. The rival female, the political match, the jealous woman who schemes against the Omega mate." She smoothed the linen over her knee. "I have read that story. I find it tiresome." Lyra leaned against the wall by the door. She did not sit down. "What do you want?" she said. "To tell you that I will withdraw the marriage proposal tomorrow morning." Selene looked at her directly. "Not because of you. Because of something I saw today that changed my calculation." "What did you see?" Selene folded her hands. They were smooth and unmarked, the hands of a woman who had never needed to open her own skin for any reason. "I arrived early," she said. "Before the formal audience. I was in the East Wing. I saw the schoolroom." She paused. "I saw the Alpha King of the Six Peaks sitting at a child's desk, writing the alphabet on parchment, while a boy who cannot speak guided his hand." Silence. "My father raised me to marry power," Selene continued. She looked at the cuff on the bedside table. "I have been trained my entire life to recognize it, to calculate it, to align myself with it. And I have never in my life seen power like what I saw in that room." She stood. She walked to the door. She paused. "He is not what the stories say," she said. "The warlord, the conqueror, that man in the schoolroom with the chalk on his fingers." She almost smiled. "That man is something the stories do not have a word for. And you made him that." Selene left. Her jasmine scent lingered for a moment, then the wind from the window dispersed it. Lyra sat on this bed. She picked up the iron cuff. She held it for a long time. Then she placed it in the bottom drawer of the desk and closed the drawer, and did not open it again. The attack came 3 days after Selene's withdrawal. Not from the West, from the remnants of the Northern Confederation, 3 rogue packs who had been raiding supply lines since the ceasefire, and who saw the political uncertainty around Cale's unmarked Luna as weakness. They struck at night, coming through the mountain passes in wolf form, silent on the snow, and the first sign was not a sound, but a smell. The acrid chemical tang of fire accelerant splashing against the East Wing wall. The East Wing, where the children slept. Lyra was in her room when the alarm sounded. She was out the door before the horn finished its first note, running barefoot down the stone corridor, and her wolf was awake and furious, and the silver light was blazing through her veins so brightly that she left luminous footprints on the dark floor. The east wing was burning. Not entirely. One wall, the exterior, where the accelerant had been thrown, the flames were climbing fast, eating through old timber, and the smoke was already filling the corridor that led to the children's dormitory. She hit the door at full speed. The lock held. She hit it again. The silver light concentrated in her palms, and the wood exploded inward, and she was through into the smoke, into the heat, and the children were awake and screaming, all except Tomek, who was standing on his bed, holding his name card above his head, as if protecting it from the flames. The smoke was thick and black, and tasted of chemical fuel and burning wool. Lyra could not see the far wall. She could barely see the children. She gathered them. 9 small bodies. 9 terrified faces. She counted them in the smoke, the way she had counted sacks in the cellar, by touch and by instinct. And she found all 9 and herded them toward the door. And the silver light from her skin was the only illumination in the smoke-filled room, a cold white glow that the children followed like a beacon. The corridor was passable, barely. The fire had reached the ceiling joists, and the air was almost too hot to breathe. She pushed the children ahead of her Anya first, because Anya was the fastest Tomek. Last, because Tomek would not leave without Lyra, and Lyra would not leave without everyone else. They reached the main hall. Soldiers were everywhere. The clash of combat from outside, the snarling of wolves, the particular percussion of bodies hitting stone. Captain Wren appeared out of the chaos, soot-streaked and bleeding from a cut above her ear, and she took the children from Lyra, with military efficiency, counting them, directing them to the inner cellar, the one place the fire could not reach. The cellar where Lyra had been chained. The children went without protest, because they knew the cellar they had hidden in it before, and familiarity in a crisis is its own kind of safety. All 9, Wren confirmed. Lyra turned back toward the east wing. "Where are you going?" Wren shouted. "The records," Lyra said. "The teaching materials. The name cards." Wren grabbed her arm. "Lyra, if the names burn," Lyra said, "then the children have nothing. They have no proof that they were ever taught to read, that they ever learned their own names, that any of this happened. I am not letting that burn." She pulled free. She ran. The east wing corridor was a tunnel of smoke and flame. The ceiling joists were failing, one of them collapsing as she ducked beneath it, showering sparks that bit into her skin like wasps. The heat was a physical force pressing against her, and the silver light was responding to it, growing brighter, pushing outward, and she realized that her wolf was not just awake. Her wolf was fighting the fire. The silver light expanded. It poured from her skin in a wave that met the flames, and the flames recoiled. Not extinguished, but pushed back, held at bay. The silver was cold, cold as moonlight, cold as winter water, and where it touched the fire hissed and diminished, and the corridor opened ahead of her like a mouth. She reached the classroom. The wall was burning, but the table was intact, and the name cards were in the wooden box on the shelf, and she grabbed the box and held it against her chest, and the silver light wrapped around her like armor, like a second skin, and she turned and ran back through the corridor as the ceiling came down behind her. She emerged into the main hall, trailing silver light and smoke, holding a wooden box full of children's names, and collapsed. Cale found her there. He came in from outside from the battle, covered in blood that was not his. His wolf was still partially manifested. His eyes were black, his canines extended, his hands ending in claws that retracted, as he dropped to his knees beside her. "Lyra," he said. Her name in his mouth was not calm this time. It was a sound that a man makes when he has just watched a building burn with someone he cannot lose inside it. "The box," she said. Her voice was raw from smoke. Her lungs felt like they had been scrubbed with sand. She held up the wooden box. The name, cards. He looked at the box. He looked at her. The silver light was fading from her skin, retreating back into her veins, leaving her shaking and cold and mortal on the stone floor of the hall. "You went back into a burning building," he said, "for a box of names." "They are not my names to lose," she said. Something broke in him. She saw it happen. The controlled facade, the tactical composure, the Alpha King architecture. It fractured, and what was underneath was not weaker, but rawer, and he pulled her against his chest and held her with his blood-covered hands, and his face was pressed against her hair, and his wolf was making a sound that was not a growl or a snarl, but a keen. The sound a wolf makes when its mate is hurt, and it cannot decide whether to rage or mourn. The battle ended before dawn. The rogue packs were routed. Their leaders were captured. The East Wing was damaged but standing. No children were harmed. Kyle carried Lyra to her room. She protested. He did not acknowledge the protest. He set her on the bed with a gentleness that contradicted every part of his appearance, which was currently that of a man who had just fought a war in close quarters, and he sat on the floor beside her bed with his back against the wall. And he stayed there while the healer treated her smoke-burnt lungs, and the dawn crept through the window. She reached down and put her hand on his shoulder. He pressed his face against her wrist and breathed. They stayed like that for a long time, his breath on her wrist, her hand on his shoulder, the wooden box of name cards on the pillow beside her head. When the healer left, and the room was quiet, and the light through the window was the soft grey of early morning, Kyle said, without lifting his face from her wrist, "I want to mark you. I want every wolf on this continent to know you are mine, and I am yours, and this bond is permanent and unbreakable. And I am asking Laura. I am asking." She looked at the top of his head, his dark hair, the scar on his temple, the blood drying on his skin that was not his, and never would be. She thought about the cellar, the chain, the iron root in the grain, the years of believing she was nothing, the wolf sleeping in the dark. She thought about Tomek writing, "I know, sit down." She thought about Selene in the doorway saying, "That man is something the stories do not have a word for." She thought about the letter C, curving like a hand cupping water. "Yes," she said. He looked up. His eyes were amber again. The green flecks were very bright. The ceremony was held in the schoolroom, not the great hall, not the throne, not the public square where the entire territory could witness the claim. Kyle asked her where, and she said the schoolroom, and he said yes, without hesitation, and Captain Wren arranged it without comment, and the soldiers moved the benches to the walls and swept the floor, and placed candles in the window because there was no chandelier. The children were there, all 9, freshly washed, freshly dressed in clothes that actually fit for the first time since the occupation. Anya had insisted on making flower crowns from the dried herbs in the supply room, and the result was 9 children wearing crowns of rosemary and dried lavender. And the smell in the classroom was chalk and dried flowers, and the warm wood and ink scent of a room where people learn things. Voss was there, standing in the back. His hands were steady today. Lyra had told him he could attend, and the expression on his face when she told him was the most complicated thing she had ever seen on a human face. He held a freshly sharpened piece of chalk in his hand, as if he had forgotten to put it down. Kale stood at the front of the classroom, in the space where Lyra usually stood to teach, and he was wearing the same coat he always wore, and his hair was combed for possibly the first time since Lyra had known him, and his hands were clean, and in his breast pocket were 2 folded pieces of paper. His name and hers. Lyra walked to him through a corridor of rosemary-crowned children, and her wolf was calm, luminous, a silver warmth beneath her skin that made the candlelight unnecessary. He took her hand, his calloused fingers against her scarred ones, the hands of a conqueror holding the hands of a teacher, and both sets of hands had done terrible and beautiful things, and neither set was clean, and neither set was ashamed. The marking was ancient, his mouth on the curve of her neck where the pulse lived close to the surface, and the bite was sharp and deep, and lit every nerve in her body like a fuse, the bond sealed with a sound that was not audible, but felt a sub-frequency that rattled the chalk dust off the boards and made the candle flames lean toward each other. She marked him back. This was not traditional. Omegas do not mark alphas. Moon-touched wolves do not mark anyone. But Lyra had spent 2 years being told what she could not do by people who were wrong, and Cale tilted his head and bared his throat to her in front of 9 children and a hall of soldiers, and an elder who was holding a piece of chalk, and she set her teeth against his skin, and the silver light poured through the bite, and he shuddered, and his wolf howled a sound that shook the windows, and every wolf in the territory heard it and knew. Tomek watched from the front row. His name card was in his hand. His face was serious and bright. When the howl faded, he opened his mouth. He spoke, a single word, the first word he had spoken in over a year. His voice was small and rough, and rusted from disuse, and it cracked on the second syllable, and it was the most beautiful sound in the room. "Teacher," he said. Lyra looked at him. Her eyes were silver. Her neck was bleeding where the mark would scar, and the scar would be beautiful, and the scar would be hers. "Yes, Tomek," she said. He held up his name card. He pointed at the letters, then at himself, the same gesture he had made in the cellar a lifetime ago. "Can I write a new letter now?" he said. His voice was halting. Each word cost him something. But they came one after another, a string of small sounds building a bridge back to the world of spoken language. Lyra knelt. She was at his eye level again, the way she had been in the cellar, the way she always made sure to be when a child needed to be seen entirely. "You can write anything you want," she said. Tomek nodded. He looked at Cale, who was standing behind Lyra, bleeding from the neck, silver light still fading from the bite, the Alpha King of the 6 Peaks marked by a moon-touched omega in a schoolroom full of rosemary-crowned orphans. Tomek held up the name card one more time, but this time he turned it around, and on the back, in his own careful handwriting, he had written something new. Not his name. Not a letter. A sentence. The first sentence he had composed entirely on his own. It said, "Names do not burn." Cale read it, silently, moving his lips, the way he always did. Then he looked at Lyra, and she looked at him, and the classroom smelled of chalk and rosemary and silver and candle wax, and on the board behind them, in Lyra's clear teaching hand, was the alphabet, and in the margin, in Cale's enormous shaky scrawl, was his name, and below it hers, and below that Tomek's, and below that every name of every child and every moon-touched wolf she could remember. And the candles were burning down to their bases, and outside the window the mountains of Greymarch were turning gold with a sunrise that did not care about any of them, but arrived anyway, as it always does, indifferent and reliable and warm.